Hi all, welcome back to software engineering course. Let's get started. Next we will look into the other approaches for analysis. Now we already know that use case can be used for problem analysis. First we will discuss the other what are the other approaches for analysis. Who will do this analysis and all, okay? So the basic aim of the problem analysis is to obtain the clear understanding of the client needs, what they exactly want from the software, what would be the constraints. Okay, now so the one who does the analysis is called as an analyst. Now these analysts are, they are not just the people who are just collecting the organization information or the client needs, but they also act as a consultant who play an active role of helping the clients and understanding and identifying their needs. Now, what are the basic principle used by these analysts? The first one is divide and conquer. So divide and conquer, it means the entire the if you have a complex problem or the entire system, it would be divided into multiple sub problems. Okay, and then what they do, they try to understand each sub problem, and once they have done the analysis of each small part of that problem, they'll combine and they'll make it into a total problem. So it is like, say suppose this is your system, client has some system, he has some needs, so they want to do an analysis. So what they will do is, the client and the analyst, they'll first divide the entire system into the subsystems. Okay, and then each subsystem would be analyzed, and later what they'll do, so they'll combine entire thing so that you'll understand the full requirement, full system. The second one is state and projection. So we'll first study about the state. Now here what will happen is, your entire system is viewed as operating in one of the several possible states, and then detailed analysis of each state is done. So say suppose your system or the problem is defined as one state, say active state or on state. Okay, suppose if we take a fan, how does it work? On and off, right? So we have two states for that fan. That is an example. Okay, so what do we do? First, we'll study its another. Whenever the fan is on, what things should be done? We will study that. Then, whenever the fan is off, what things has to be done? We will study that. Then we will combine this so that we will get the entire problem. So we say here the state is nothing but the system is first viewed as a one one in several possible state. That means it can have multiple states. So first we'll assume that the system is one state. We will do the analysis of that. Then we go to the next state and then do a detailed analysis of that. The next one the next one is projection. So in projection, what happens is, different viewpoints of the system are defined, and then the system is analyzed from these different perspectives. The different projections obtained are combined to form the analysis for the complete system. Let's take an example to understand this projection. So say suppose I have given you a requirement to develop the library management system, and my viewpoint about that project is different, and from your viewpoint, say suppose if we have five people who are doing an analysis of that library management system, we could have different viewpoints, we could have different perspectives. So what happens in projection is, whenever we have these different views, right, we different projections, so each of these projections are analyzed, and then these projections, so whatever the projection viewpoints we have made, right, those are combined, and then the analysis of the complete system is performed. Okay, so we have discussed use case, then we have discussed divide and conquer, state and projection. Next we will study two more methods of problem analysis, the DFDs and ER diagrams, but I will also tell you about the sequence diagrams and activity diagrams in the next slides. Okay, first we will study about the DFDs. DFD is nothing but data flow graphs or data flow diagrams. Okay, now these are commonly used for problem analysis. DFDs are quite general and are not limited to problem analysis for requirement specification. They were in use long before the engineering discipline began. So these DFDs are very useful in understanding a system and can be effectively used during analysis. Now, so what will happen in DFD is it views the system as a function that transforms the inputs into the desired outputs. Okay, data will typically undergo a series of transformation before it becomes the output. Now this will be represented in a DFD. The agent that performs the transformation of the data from one state to another state is called as a process or a bubble. Okay. Now, a DFD shows the movement of the data through different transformations or processes in the system. The processes are usually shown in a named a circle with a name like this. Okay, a named circle. This is a process. So we have five processes here. Then the data flows are represented by named arrows entering or leaving the bubbles. That means these arrows you can see here, right? These are all the arrows. So these arrows are the data flows wherein it has been given a name. Okay. Now, apart from this, we have these rectangles. So these rectangles, it represents a source or sink and is a net originator or consumer of the data. Whatever is represented in this rectangle, it is a source or sink and it could be a net originator or consumer of the data. Okay, so we have apart from this, we also have these lines here, right? Employee record, company records, and tax rate. These lines are there. So these are external files. Okay, so whatever you have a named circle, we call it as a process. Then the data flows are shown via the named arrows. Straight lines, it represents named straight lines, it represents external file. Then these rectangles are uh, the source or the sink. So we will consider an example of a DFD for a system that pays a worker. That means we'll consider an industry. The industry has many workers and monthly it has to pay its workers, right? So this is a DFD for the for that system. So what will happen here is in this DFD there is one basic input data flow, that is weekly timesheet. So what is a timesheet now? So if you are a worker and working in an industry, your time in the industry, the time you have spent in the industry and in the company, and for how much, for how much time you are working. So all those things will be logged into a sheet, and that sheet is called as a timesheet. Okay, so this timesheet is allocated to an individual. So he has to log in, like Monday he has to work for 9 hours, Tuesday for 8 hours. He has to log in the times whatever he has worked in there. Okay, next, okay, the output here is paycheck. Okay, issue paycheck, that is the output here is paycheck. That means at the end of the week or end of the month you have to pay him via check or cash. So we will consider him here it as a paycheck. Okay, now in this system what will happen, how this system will work is, first the employee record is retrieved. How the employee record is retrieved? So by giving the employee ID to a process called get employee file. And the employee ID is unique. Say for example, the employee ID is 1234. This is a unique ID. And what will happen is, first you have to give the employee ID, the unique employee ID to this process get employee file. So once you give the ID, the employee record would be fetched. This is a external file employee record. From there, this particular employee ID's details would be fetched. Now, so once we have got the employee details, then we have to check for how many hours he has worked in a week or a month. Then we have to check whether he has done any overtime. So this weekly pay, this process, what it does is it will check for the regular hours what he has worked for, and the pay rate would be added for that particular regular hours. Next we have overtime pay. That means this process it would check whether the employee has done any overtime work. If it is there, then from his file what is the overtime rate for that particular employee level, what is the overtime rate, it will be fetched and it would be added. So once we get the actual pay plus the overtime pay, that would be our total pay. So once we have got the total pay, right, the next process is deduct taxes. So from this is actual pay, we apply some tax rates. Again, this tax rates is an external file, so we have to deduct the taxes. So once we deduct the taxes, the updated pay has to be entered in the company records as well as in the employee record. So whatever we get after deducting of the pay, deducting of the taxes is the net pay for that employee. So for that net pay, we have to issue a paycheck for that particular worker, and whatever the net pay is, it has to be again updated in the company records. And the last one is we have to distribute the paycheck to the worker. Getting it how this DFD is working? Next, we will study about leveled DFD sets. Now, many systems are too large for a single DFD to describe the data processing clearly. So, some decomposition and abstraction mechanism should be used for such systems. So, what will happen in some cases is some project is it would be too complex, right? So, if you draw a single DFD, it is very difficult to analyze that. So, in that case, what we do, we divide the DFDs. Okay, so such DFDs, the divided DFCs, we call them as leveled DFD sets. So the first level would be level 0 DFD, and it is also called as context diagram. So in this level 0 DFD, what would happen is you will only draw the entire system, entire project as one process, and you will just mention all the sinks and sources for that. So if you consider a project, for example, online crime reporting system, the entire system is considered as one process, and these are the sources or the sinks. Okay. Now the level DFD set has a starting DFD, that is level 0 DFD. Now it is a very abstract representation of the system. It will identify the major inputs and outputs and the process in the system. Then, so in the level 0 DFD, we have only one process, right? That is the entire system itself. In the next level, what we do, level 1 DFD, we will divide this process into sub process, or we refine that so that a little complex DFD is drawn for that level. Okay, if we would consider, this is the level 1 DFD, wherein we have kept the process as a single one, and we have divided these sources and the sinks. For case management, if we give some input, then it should generate the output, something like this. If you see the level 2 DFD, the entire this system, crime reporting system, we have divided into different process, right? Wherein we have login, checking of the credential, managing the modules. These are all the different processes. Again, in the next level, level 3, what would we do? We will again decompose these processes, and this will continue till where? Till these processes become abstract. You cannot again decompose it. Till that level, we will divide the DFDs. Getting it? Now, the net inputs and the output of a DFD for a process are same as the inputs and the output of the process in the higher level DFD. This refinement stops if each bubble is considered to be easily specified or understood. The processes are decomposed. The data decomposition also occurs in this DFD. Next, we will see the difference. A DFD represents flow of data, whereas flowchart it shows flow of control. In flowchart, we use loops and decisions, but we do not represent loops and decisions in a DFD. So, in a DFD, what will happen? The designer has to specify what transforms are performed while drawing the DFD, but in the flowchart, you have to specify how the transformations are performed. Okay, now these three are the basic difference between the DFD and flowchart. Now we will see what is a data dictionary. Now this data dictionary is nothing but a repository of various data flows defined in a DFD. The associated data dictionary, it states the components, the structure of each data flow in the DFD, and structure of the file. So to define the structure, different notations are used. So first notation is composition. So composition is represented by a plus. Selection is represented by vertical bar and repetition is represented by a star. Suppose you want to calculate the weekly timesheet of an employee. What all things you need? You need employee name plus the employee ID. Then you need his regular hours and overtime hours. And you have a star here. That means for a week, this repeats. For a week or two, it repeats, right? Then if you want to have the pay rate, then it could be the pay rate could be hourly, daily, or weekly plus the amount. So we use the composition, selection, as well as repetition for using this data dictionary. Next, we will study about the ER diagrams. So, ER diagram is nothing but entity relationship diagram. You know this one, right? You have created this in DBMS. So, ER diagrams form the logical database design and can be easily converted into initial table structure for a database. ER diagram have two main concepts. One is the entity and the other one is the relationship. So entities are the main information holders or concepts in the system. Entities can be viewed as types which describe all elements of some type which have common properties. So these entities are represented as boxes in the ER diagram like this. Then entity is equivalent to a table in the database. Again, these entities have attributes and these attributes can be viewed as columns in the database table. And while you draw, how can you draw attribute? With a oval. Okay. Then we have relationship. Relationship between the two entities is represented by a labeled line like this, and a line it has to be labeled. Now this connects the boxes, that is the entities. Okay. In some notations, the name of the relationship is mentioned inside a diamond. So the examples of the relationship is like work for, wherein employees work for a company, or studies in, student studies in a college. Okay. Now we will take a simple example wherein you can see this diagram, right? So this diagram is for auction system wherein a user he sells a item, then the item is based on some category, or user can place a bid. So here user, items, categories and bids are the entities, and this labeled lines it shows the relationship. That means user sells items or user can place a bid, then I, again the common form of relationships are one to one. Okay, we know this one, right? One to one, then many to one, or it can be one to many or many to many, right? So here it is represented. So a single user can sell multiple items, a single user can place multiple bids, then multiple items can belong to a same category, and a single item can have multiple bids. So these are the relationships here. We will take an example, ER diagram of the online crime reporting. So in this diagram, whatever you see in this box are called as the entities. So FIR, user, admin, and police officer are the entities in our online crime reporting system, and the relationship between them we can define them in a diamond shaped box. Okay. So and the relationships are named like 1 is to 1 or m is to m. Now these attributes are represented in a oval shape. Say for example, if we consider this entity user, what are the attributes of the user? A user can have a name. Name can again be divided into first name, middle name, and last name. User can have a user ID. User can have phone number, address, email ID, like that. Then a FIR can have the attributes such as FIR ID, the date when the FIR was lodged, and the type of the FIR. So, many FIRs could be registered by many users. So, this registered by is a relationship here. Okay. Next, we will study about the sequence diagram. Again, this sequence and activity, these two diagrams are again used for the problem analysis or requirement. Yeah. analysis. So in the sequence diagram, it shows the object interactions arranged in the time sequence. It represents the objects involved in the scenario and the sequence of messages exchanged between the objects needed to carry out the functionality of that scenario. So we call here whatever we represent in a box, we call them as objects. Okay, here user, system, and database is a object. Again, this sequence diagram is for a basic functionality, that is login. How login would happen? So a user would log into a system and his credentials would be checked with the database. So your database, system, and user, we call them as objects. And this vertical lines you can see here, right? These bars we call them as lifelines. Okay, so different processes or the objects that live simultaneously are represented by these lines, and then we have these arrows, right? So these arrows are the messages exchanged between the objects, and whatever you get the response, you depict it in a dashed line. Okay, so if you have a straight line without any dashes, it is the messages exchanged between the objects, and if you have a dashed line coming backwards, then we say that is the response. Okay, so for example, let's consider this one simple login system. Now, this user, system, and database can be simultaneously active. So, user first he'll enter the credentials. System should verify. Okay, first he'll log in. That is a login message. Credentials would be sent to the system. A system will verify in the database whether he has, he has given proper credentials or not. In response, database verifies whether the credentials are correct or not, and then again if it is correct, successful login, successful message would be sent to user, or else it would give the error message. So you have to just remember that whenever you have objects, represent them in this square rectangles, these boxes, then you have to have the vertical bars, that is these are the lifelines of that object, and then the messages passed between them and the response. Next is the activity diagram. So the activity diagram, it illustrates the flow of control in a system and refers to the steps involved in the execution of the use case. Here in the activity diagram, we say that it represents the flow of control in a system. Now, how can we draw activity diagram for your project? So first is the initial stage, and it is represented something like this. So everything, it must start from here, that is the first stage or the initial stage. Okay, then we represent activity like this. Activity or action we represent in a rectangle box or this boxes. Okay, so this could be activity or an action. Then we have arrow marks here, right? So these arrow marks are used for control flow. It says how the control is flowing. Then we have this one. This is the final state. Okay, so this means this is the final state of your system. You cannot do any operation beyond that. Then suppose if you have this diamond shape, okay, so if you have this diamond shape, it says is a decision node or branching. Then after that we have fork. Fork is nothing but this one, okay, where a single control comes in and we have multiple or concurrent actions or flows going out, we call them as fork. It is used to support the concurrent activities. Next we have join, wherein multiple control flows would come together and it will result in an activity. So these are used to support the concurrent activities converging into one. So these are the concurrent activities, so this will converge into one. So these are the basic notations you should understand while drawing a activity diagram. Okay, next we will study about the validations. Like, the basic objective of the requirement validation activity is to ensure that the software requirement specification, it reflects the actual requirements accurately and clearly. Now, one of the objective is to check that the SRS document is itself of good quality. What could be the basic errors that can be made while writing the SRS. One could be omission, other could be inconsistency, third could be incorrect fact, and the fourth could be ambiguity. So, what do you mean by omission? So, in this type of error, some user requirements are simply not included in the SRS. So, this directly affects the external completeness of the SRS. Omission is nothing but the SRS itself is not mentioned, the requirement itself is not mentioned in the SRS. You have just skipped it. Next is inconsistency. So, this type of error can be due to the contradictions within the requirements themselves or to incompatibility of the stated requirements with the actual requirements of the client. So there is inconsistency means in some part of the SRS the functionality is saying one thing and at the other part it is giving the different meaning. Next is incorrect fact. Errors of this type occur when some fact recorded in the SRS is not correct. The last one is ambiguity. Errors of this type occur when there are some requirements that have multiple meanings. You could interpret a single requirement in different way, that means ambiguity. Okay, now besides improving the quality of the SRS itself, the validation, it should focus on uncovering these types of errors. Now inspections of the SRS, frequently it's called as requirements review, are the most common method of validation. So how can we check whether the SRS it does not have ambiguity or inconsistency is through the requirement review. What will happen in this requirement review? A review group would be created. Now this review group, it should include the author of the SRS, someone who understands the needs of the client like the analyst, then a person from the design team, then a person from the development team and the test team, then a person who is responsible for maintaining the requirement documents. These all people will come together, they'll form a group, then they will go through the SRS to check whether if they have missed something or whether some incorrect fact is present, the requirements are inconsistent. So all these things can be checked in this review group. Apart from that, review meetings we have something called as checklist. So checklists are usually used in the reviews to focus on the review effort and ensure that no major source of error is overlooked by the reviewers. So, checklist is nothing but a document wherein instead of doing a detailed review of the SRS, just you check the checklist and make sure that the error is not present. So, this is the validation how you can check whether the SRS is of good quality or not. Okay. Now, this completes your third chapter. So we'll have a quiz now. Level 0 DFD is also called as dash. I've got a minute of time to answer this. Okay, time up. That's it for today. We'll conclude our session. Thank you.